Mm-hmm.
This is a recording for the CUPHAT project. My name is Matthew O'Brien. Today is the 29th of August 2023, and I have here with me Hazel Cloney and Eddie Doyle. Thank you very much both. Can you each confirm for the recorder that you're happy to take part in the project?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you very much. And could each of you just spell your name for the recorder, please? Hazel, we might start with you.
Hazel, Hazel, Cloney, Cloney.
EDDIEDOYLE.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So I wonder if, and maybe we'll take it in turn, if you could tell me a little bit about your early life. Maybe Hazel, will start with you. When and where were you born? Where did you grow up? And maybe some of your earliest memories.
Oh wow! I was born. I was born in Wexford, in Furlong's home in Wexford, and I was brought up in Feather-on-Sea, County Wexford. And it's where I went to school in Poundfar, Shilbagan, and then I went to New Ross, and then I trained to be a secretary and ended up going to England and bringing up a young girl as a single mother. And from there then, but I've always been interested in music, so that was always a thread. And my parents, my father in particular, was a local historian. His name was Sean Cloney. So the history, I suppose, has always been a thread as well. And now I lived then in Wexford, just outside Wexford, in Crossabeg for a time. Then my work then brought me to Duffcarry, Camp Hill, where I was a kindergarten teacher there, and which is a beautiful area. Loved the Gorey area. Then came down to the New Ross area and met up with Eddie again. We had met in our early 20s. Now we met up again, and we married then, and we lived in the Ballywilliam area then for we're still here, and did the music. We have a group, our own, a twosome called Bog Oak, and we've done the local circuit, where Eddie's song Underneath the Blackstairs has become very popular, and I suppose that's where we are at the moment. Yeah, so again the history is still there, the music is still there, and
Brilliant. Yeah, we can definitely talk about that as we go through. Eddie, what about yourself? Maybe a little bit about your early life and where you were born and where you grew up.
I was, excuse me, I was born in New Ross in the community hospital, and I was brought up in Ballywilliam, where we now live. Got an interest at about 6 or 7 years of age in music in a very overwhelming way. I went into a concert which was hosting the army band, who had a brass sound that just transfixed me one night as I peeped over a balcony. I was just blown away. So I had a musical epiphany on that evening, and I was chasing music ever since, and I set out to be a songwriter. I really had it in the back of my head from about the age of 12 or 13. I had to kind of break almost a pathological shyness by going out and doing different things, which would have helped. One which was selling encyclopedias door to door. Another one was selling aluminium windows. And then found my way over to England and worked in sales over there, and gradually steered myself towards Canada. I got a one-way ticket from Toronto on a Greyhound bus which took me to New York. I arrived with $20 Canadian in my pocket. I jumped a subway and found myself in Sunnyside looking for Mick Flynn from Ballindunny to see if I could find him, which I did after the 9th pub, which was hosted by a Cavan lady who gave me as they call it, a scratch or a slate for the evening. So I drank and filled my belly. Met Mick Flynn that evening. I ended up getting work in New York, plastering houses with 2 Wicklow lads, and about a week later I found myself trying to chase a gig that was in Atlantic City, where they were looking for a guitar player to play of an evening. So I found myself in Atlantic City, stayed there for about 9 months, I got ripped off. I had my bags and baggage stolen the first night I was down there, and I was left with a pair of pants and a shirt and a pair of sneakers. I ended up begging and borrowing from fellas from New Jersey and from the Orkney Islands and from Wales, and they were all pushing rolling chairs on the boardwalk in Atlantic City. It was a pram which comprised of two back wheels, like a pram wheel, and one small one, and you pushed heavy Americans from casino to casino in Atlantic City for $20 from one end of the casino to the other. And I stayed there for about 9 months, and a couple of chaps there decided to start a band. We sent scouts out who went to New Orleans, and they rang back to say there's a band needed immediately on Bourbon Street, and we need a 3-piece down here right pronto. And I rang and I spoke to the owner of the club, and I told him that we had been offered $400 a night to go up north, up to Canada, but we would consider it if we headed south, it being warmer and towards Christmas time. So he said, thank you, that would be lovely. And the next thing, we were buying a second-hand car through 2 other friends who had a few bob, and we were sailing to New Orleans. So anyway, I stayed there for about 10 years in the States. I came home and met the lady that I had known many years before, and we've been together since. I have a lovely little girl, and that brings us up to date.
And so when did you settle down then in Ballywilliam?
97.
Roughly the early it was around 1920, because I finished up in the kindergarten, and then I took a year break. 2020. Yeah.
Much younger than she looks.
Yeah, we look at too. 2020, yeah, and then we took up sheep farming along with the with the music, and then our daughter Roisin came along. So she's 19. 19 now. So yeah.
And how was the transition to sheep farming?
Very interesting.
Getting there.
Straight pedestrian type of people to sheep farming.
We're both from farming backgrounds, so I suppose, yeah.
And so, how would you describe this area to somebody who's never been here before?
Very ancient and very sacred, I would say. And very decent people. Very honest people, and a lovely place to live. Yeah, blessed to be from here.
And when you were growing up, would you have had, I know you mentioned the musical kind of affinity, would you have had kind of an affinity for place as well, or where you were growing up?
In what way?
In terms of maybe an appreciation for the area, or an awareness of the history and that ancient kind of nature of the place.
Well, my father and mother as well would have always told us about old legends or old stories connecting where we were being brought up and our locality. St. Mullins being one of them, and Ratnure, and the mountains, White Mountain and so on. Templeudigan. I mean, it's all, you're talking about 5th, 6th century churches. It's way back, and that's not even close to early habitation here. I mean, this is going on for thousands of years, and we're just straddling the back of it. I'm a Doyle, so through the Viking lineage is where my people come from. My mother was a Power. Through the Norman lineage is where our people came from. Hazel's people are native Irish, I would say. Cloney.
Cloney, yeah, and Wexford, and my mother, back a couple of generations, would have been part of the German kind of Palatine who came over. Not quite the German Palatine, but they were from German area. Yeah.
And so did either of your families have an interest then in history? I know basically you mentioned obviously your historical kind of interests, but did your families have interests in historical places or people or events that would have happened?
They would have read a lot, and would have had a lot of people in their orbit who would have read a lot and would have been interested in the area and would have been connected through the Civil War and the 1920s struggle, and from that, there would have been family connections,
There would be events as well, like I'm thinking of the Passion, for instance, in St. Mullins,
Yeah.
which is a very ancient one. And when we were researching a little bit for the Underneath the Blackstairs song, we were told there were 3 patrons. One was in Enniscorthy, where the traders used to be part of. They were the traders in Enniscorthy, and then they'd come out to St. Mullins, and that was on a Sunday, and then they would do another one up at the meetings, which is where Frockin Sunday is. These were the same traders, and then they go back to Enniscorthy again, and that was a tradition that kind of happened for a long time. But yeah, events, graveyards is always an interesting one. My parents at home were, looked after the graves, were into history, who was buried whose connection. I think that's part of Irish culture too, that we're interested in our ancestors and where they are and where they're buried and who's connected to who. And likewise with yours.
Hurling, football, even handball. Just things that actually put balm on what happened in the 1920s after the Civil War, where brothers were fighting brothers, and suddenly they were on hurling pitches playing against each other. So out of that came our strange history.
And would either of you have an interest in sport when you were kind of in school, or would you have played sport? Yeah.
I played sport. I played with Rathnure. I played with the county underage. I won a Leinster under 14 medal with Wexford in 1977, and a junior A county title with Rathnure in 1984. 84 or 81? 84, I think it was. So yeah, I had dreamed out in the field at the back of our house when I was holding the hurl, marching up, that I was in Croke Park, and I was at the end of the 15 rather than the sub that I ended up being on the under 14 team that won in 1977, but that could be worse. It was either a case of hurling for me or music, and hurling was not getting the same attention as music, and music took over.
We'll come back to the music for sure. In terms of local traditions, you mentioned obviously the patterns. Were there any other things, were there any other celebrations that happened locally from either your childhood or even that are maybe still happening to this day?
Celebrations in St. Mullins would be the pattern at the end of July, and the same I suppose with Templudigan, mostly where people are buried, and it's part of just our culture and part of our upbringing that we attend. Mind you, I don't attend anymore. I participate in maintenance of graves, but I leave it at that.
Yeah, the drama was a big one here in Ballywilliam, and mumming. There's the ash tree which we were talking about earlier. There's some buildings in the backyard of that pub, which is on the crossroads of Ballywilliam, and in one of those buildings there's an upper floor, so it's like a loft, and they would have practiced the mumming there. And local, most of these men now are passed on. I'm thinking of John Wickham in particular, and he only died last year, and he was part of the drama as well, which was in the old school in Racarogue, and that's gone through 3 separate stages. You've got the real old building, which is demolished now, and then you have the one that was built in the 1930s, which is now the community hall, and now you've got the present school, which is the present school. And Racarogue have just recently got planning permission to put in, which we were talking about earlier, Matthew, about social hubs, community hubs. They have got the funding. No, they haven't got the funding. They've got the planning permission, and they're going to put in a community centre. And they're going to put in the hall, the tunnels, the running track, you name it, they're going to put it in there. And that's going to be right opposite the church in Rackrogue. And that will take in a lot of its surrounding area for people to go. Yes, because it'll be a meeting place. They'll have a cafe, they'll have a garden, they have the basketball, the foot, and all of that stuff there. Yeah. So drama was something that happened. Plays, concerts, the tops. Did they do the tops of the parish? Yeah, we did the same down in Feathered. It was great rivalry, the tops of the parish. Plays, three-act plays, concerts, the school concerts. You had the school concerts too. You showed me photographs of them.
Yeah.
They would have been happening and that would be Ballywilliam, Rackrogue. Ballywilliam is a funny village. It's kind of split. You've got the village, which is part of the shops and the two pubs and the co-op and the garage, and then you've got the school, which is about a mile away, and the church. So it's not like other villages.
No. It's like a field. And at various points in the field you find different places.
Yeah. And another funny thing too about, there's a river goes through Ballywilliam. It's like the north siders and the south siders. You've got the north part is in the townsland of Enniscorthy or Address, and the south one is New Ross. And I'm part of the Tidy Towns along with some other women, and that has its own few stories as well. I don't think I'll get into them right here, but yes.
So that kind of brings us on to the kind of community spirit, say, in Ballywilliam. And you mentioned earlier, Eddie, that there's a good sense of community here. Has that changed, or has that evolved over time? And even, in terms of offerings that maybe used to exist in Ballywilliam that maybe no longer do you think that's part of it, like facilities or services?
I think it's very contrived, an awful lot of it. It's an attempt at things, but mostly people have electric gates now that are never broached. And they're living inside their compounds. I don't really see much in terms of community in a lot of ways in comparison to the way that it was when people were harvesting and they got together and you had families who were seeing and knowing each other every week, I suppose, or even more often. So I think a lot has changed over the last few years with the COVID thing. It's after illuminating a lot of things for a lot of people as to where they want to be, whether they want to be behind their gates or whether they want to be out meeting the people or whether they want to be working from home or whether they want to be going to their jobs and looking busy. It's a strange time.
Yeah. Well, recently there was we have a defibrillator and the ash tree, and part of keeping that every year you have to fundraise a little. So last we had the first bank holiday, new one, in February, so we did a walk and we raised enough money to keep the defib. But during the year, Temple Lunagan have a handball club, and they got new jerseys for their young participants, their young players, and there was great excitement on that particular evening, and they very generously donated €500 to the community group, the Ballywilliam Development Group, which we're part of, and that money was to go towards the upkeep of the defibrillator. But the enthusiasm I saw that evening when they handed over the cheque up at the handball alley of these young lads getting their new jerseys, girls and boys, it was delightful, absolutely delightful, and they were running in and out. And then when we went in for the coffee into the hall, which is next door to the handball alley, they were all coming in there, and there was balls kind of flying this way and that way, and the jerseys were on them. So yeah, it's in places it's alive and well, as regards the community and things that are there. Recently I heard that we've got another new bus route, 4 bus routes to Carlow going through Ballywilliam. I thought, God, that's brilliant. It probably helps out the students that need to go to college, and because I haven't checked out the times yet, and I think they're helping out people who want to go for a couple of hours to Carlow, whether sightseeing or shopping and that kind of thing. I thought, oh, that's great, because we have a service to Enniscorthy. I think it goes to New York and it goes through so Ballywilliam is being cared for some things, taken into account. Yeah, but we have lost the pub. We have one pub left.
We've lost our police station. We've lost our clinic that used to be there for medical help. You know, there's
and the post office. The post office was a bit of a downer because the co-op do a couple of bills. You can still do a few post office or paying bills through the co-op, and so that facility, I don't know. I don't know how it's available anyway. But with the post office, you would miss from time to time.
We're a long way away from having the village with the bakery and the.
You might come yet. We got a new hardware store or shop, and that only happened a couple of months ago.
Yeah.
So,
everything's changing. It's all in flux at the minute, and it's an interesting time. That's the Chinese say, "May you live in interesting times." We are certainly living in interesting times.
Well, our takeaways one of the finest around. They come from yours.
Speaking of Chinese, I was going to say Japanese. Would you have gone for sushi if I'd said Japanese?
No.
And what do you think the main cause of that change is? You know, is it technologically kind of based? Is it I don't know, people coming into the community, you know, settling here, coming from the outside, or what's the kind of main driver?
I think people who have been leaving have brought back a more accelerated kind of society, I suppose, and that's been further accelerated by technology and social media and open connection to any part of the world now, really. So it all becomes one big kind of cosmopolitan mess of culture, and it's getting further away from our own culture. It's on a remove totally from what we have naturally in this country, or they have in Wales, or they have in Scotland, or the islands off of Scotland, or wherever, you know. But I think it's I suppose it was going to go in that direction anyway, because it was being driven by America, it's been driven by the West, and what is going to be underpinning everything is just the money or the profit involved in it, and you know, that's what's driving the entire thing.
Yeah, the technology definitely. Social media has its downsides and its upsides. I suppose it's like everything, but the community. There's still things happening and coming to the area. Like I think the community centre, which is going to happen in Rathcaroga, is a huge start. And that's a huge positive. Yes, you lose things, but you gain things as well. GAA, which ties in with Templeunic in the handball, it's been a very beneficial thing. I think in nearly every community or parish, it really gets the children. Like I'm just thinking of Rathcaroga when our little one went to school there. Just to see the enthusiasm of them, and they recently actually brought back their field day, another community event, and it was an awful pity it wasn't around when our little girl was going, because that would have been such a lovely way to meet other parents in a fun way in the summer, and it's a family day out. But they got it going about 2 or 3 years ago, and it clashes with Frock and Sunday, which we usually go to up in the meetings up in the Blackstairs Mountains. The two are on the same day, which is the last Sunday in July. So field days would be another thing that most communities have, and they usually time in with the Pattern. And Patterns are very much still in lots of Temple Ludigan has its Pattern, Rathcorrog. We do a whole heap of containers every single summer, because as it turns out our four parents are buried in 4 different graveyards. So we have, so that, and they're all different Pattern days, of course, and so I have to take note of all the different dates, so that's sorts all that out. So field days, another great thing.
Flowers being the glue that keeps our family together. A container for harmony, this.
And tell me a little bit more then about the music scene, maybe in the area. You obviously got interested in it at a very young age, so how has maybe that developed, or?
Well, it doesn't translate into a job, that's for sure.
Well, it did one time.
Well, I suppose, yeah.
Oh God,
yeah, if you want to do the pub scene here, you can do the pub scene, I suppose, but you're really limited to a Saturday, maybe a Friday if you're lucky, or if you're fairly okay, you might be able to get a Sunday evening, so you might have 2, maybe 3 gigs. If you're in the town, you're covered. If you're out in the country, you're not. You're driving all over the place like a jackass, and you spend more time loading up and driving and unloading and loading up and driving and unloading than you do gigging nearly. It's just part of the thing, but it's it doesn't happen here on this side of the coast, unfortunately, with the same kind of drama that you would get on the west coast of Ireland. But then again, they have sequestered trad music for their kind of thing. We don't have that here, but there is quite a lot of people creating their own music here, and it's beginning to kick a little bit, and I can kind of see a little bit of a tide lifting now, where originality and imagination and uniqueness and individuality is beginning to kick in, and radicalism and protest, which is a very, very healthy thing, and that's beginning to happen. I can see that definitely.
Yeah, I'd say at the beginning of the music, like what Eddie mentioned in our introduction, New Ross has a musical society, and it has St. Michael's Theatre, and I remember as a child being brought there to the musical society productions, and Eddie remembers this amazing, and there was always a brass band. I think I'm not sure if there still is in New Ross, but the pipe bands are very another community thing, and quite strong in a lot of different areas. New Ross would have one, Wexford would have one, and I know Campile has one. So whenever like field days and things like that, the pipe band actually came down to the Norman Festival, which was down in front of Feather Castle there about 2 weeks ago, and they came down. They played 2 tunes. One was for the First World War and one was for the Second World War, and that was their contribution. It was absolutely beautiful. So music would have been very much in the towns, I suppose, as well as in the country areas.
It had a force when we were growing up in the 70s. Christy Moore was able to stop Karen Sore from happening. You know, that was a serious thing. Christy has been probably a lone voice, I suppose, in being courageous and putting an end to a lot of injustice, or at least illuminating it and giving it some kind of clearance to be able to allow people to see what's going on, or hear what's going on, or at least have a different vantage point from a manipulated kind of a viewpoint. But he's himself, and maybe Jody Gallagher, he's a songwriter up in the north now, he's beginning to write some good songs, and maybe the rest, it's pretty pappish what's going on. There's no one really getting up, standing like Billy Bragg, or standing like John Lennon stood, you know, or Sinead O'Connor for that matter. There's not many of those out there.
Yeah, there's There's still local musicians though still playing, and they're still coming together. Like we have a few friends, and like they'd meet in Richie Roach's and on a Friday night in Newtown, and there's a few other lads and they'd meet in Clonroach, and they're keeping it alive. If it's not in their own houses, sometimes in their own house and sometimes in a pub. Like sometimes we are asked to do daycare centre, which is the people that go to daycare centres. We were doing the community hospital for years. We'd go in every 6 or 2 months or something and play for the patients in there for about an hour.
Which is lovely, and that's the power of music being used in a very...
It's wonderful.
In a perfect way, really. There's no transaction other than a straight form of music, and people are able to enjoy their memories and their associations with songs and so on. So there's no hungry publican with his tongue hanging out waiting to pour more out of his pumps because you're not playing music that's not fast enough. Drink, put the peanuts out with the salt on them. We need drinkers. No, that goes with dealing with people in the homes, and you get a much more pleasurable feeling when you walk out after playing for them too, I can assure you.
So given your kind of connection to music, and the fact that you lived in the States and kind of you were in London, what was the kind of reach of music then into those places, or was there any connection between the Blackstairs and these places?
Well, it's funny you should ask that question. I remember long ago playing music with a couple of chaps from the north of Ireland, and we were based in Louisiana, and we had to go to Savannah in Georgia to play music on the St. Patrick's Day for the nuns. So the band was in a fairly fragile state, and we were about to break up, so we had a very an erratic journey up to Savannah, Georgia. But by the time we got there anyway, we were placated and we met some lovely ladies there. One in particular who was from Ballymurphy, and she said, "Where are you from?" I said, "Wexford." She said, "The Blackstairs bound us." I said, "That's true." She said, "I have an old song that's never seen the light of day from the Blackstairs Mountains, and it's written by the gentleman who wrote Boule Vogue and Follow Me Up to Carol, P.J. McCall." And this is what she gave me here. I'm just going to read a verse or two out of it. It's called Caheroo, and in brackets Red Charlie, which is the name of the jutting lower section of the Blackstairs Mountains that you see as you head towards Rathnure. It starts off, a drink, my pretty maid, said Cottier, drawing near to the miller's daughter singing down the lonely mountain lane. He drained the draught, then suddenly his arms around her threw. With me you'll ride whate'er betide, said roving Cottier Roo. So this is the story of Cottier Roo, who grabbed a miller's daughter under pretext of getting a drink of water, and he threw her up on his horse and took her to the Blackstairs, where he had a den. And in the words of this, the first mention that I've come across of the name of the den is the Witch's Cave, and the last verse says, "Then down the Witch's Cave he sprang, whose floor no mortal knew, and love, the life of all the world, was death to Cottier Roo," by P.J. McCall. And in an asterisk which he puts over Witch's Cave, the nun says, "On the top of the Blackstairs mountain, huge rocks covering the cave." And when I was a young fella, I had an interest in trying to find the tunnel, because there was an old story about a tunnel which leads from Cottier's den to the other side in County Carlow around Ballymurphy, and it has always been a desire to get into that mountain and see what's inside it for me. But this particular story has engaged me for many years, to the point when I was a young fella, I asked John Leary, a local man here who was in his late 80s at the time, to take me to where he remembered the opening to the cave being. And there was steps in his memory cutout where the outlaw was able to bring his horse down into the underground cave. But due to the fact that local farmers had been losing their sheep around the 1920s, they threw rocks in on top of it and covered up the entrance, and it's been inaccessible ever since. But this kind of spurred on some kind of a quest to try and find this for me. So I set off with John Leary one Sunday morning, but John couldn't make it. He was getting old and the mountain was unforgiving, and we turned back anyway, disappointed,
and didn't get another chance.
Never found it.
Never found it.
No. So yeah, there's a story in it. And the other thing that I wanted to make note of was in the 1830s there was a serious altercation between local people and the establishment, and it featured subsequent information now leads me to believe that it was two landlords who colluded. One was they were both from Carlow. They had Carlow origins. One with a house up in Rathnure, a big mansion, and they went to try and it was a land grab really. They both tried to take the land from the local farmers who were feeding their sheep up on the Blackstairs mountains, up on Bantry Commons, and they fenced them off. And anyway, in the injustice of the situation, there was a priest who got involved. His name was Tom Furlong, and he made noise, and he was very helpful to try and bring the machine a little bit louder. And eventually they enlisted the services of Daniel O'Connell, who agreed to represent them. And there was a court case that raged through the courts to the High Court in Ireland in the 1830s, where he spent 14 years trying to win this case, and he eventually did. And there was a lady up in Rathnure who lived in Grange. Her name was Mrs. Caulfield. She would have relations down where we come from in later years. In fact, my grandmother would have, her family would have had connections with the Caulfields up in Grange. And Mrs. Caulfield was one of the people who had a strong voice and who resisted the establishment's push to try and grab land. And the news was broke after the 14-year struggle in courts had finalised itself, that they had won the case, when a gentleman called Fanning knocked on the door. And in those days the custom was to have your shoes in your hands when you entered the house. So he came in with his shoes in his hands, and he saw a coffin where Mrs. Caulfield lay, and the first thing he said to all who were there, loud enough to hear, was, "Is the dead ye are and the mountain free?" And that became a kind of a little bit of a catch cry, I suppose, from that time that people remember. But I wrote a little bit of a verse about it, and I have kind of a rough idea of how the beginning starts with Fanning, but I just wanted to secure that man's name because Chris Forrestal was the one who told me about it, and it would have been lost in the mists of time otherwise. But it starts off with shoes in hand did Fanning stand inside of Caulfield's house. There lay poor Mrs. Caulfield in a coffin like a mouse. And I'm undecided about where it goes from there. So I'm going to start with the first real verse. That part is a prelim. So it starts off, "I'll tell to you a story true that happened long ago, when a wealthy man with a filthy plan should have swung from Crook na Crow. He never thought that what he sought would drain his fortune low. Blame a Kerry man by the name of Dan O'Connell, don't you know? This wealthy man tried to steal the land that was commons for the poor. They'd grazed their sheep on mountain steep, keeping hunger from their door. But he fenced them off, this arrogant toff, and he hired a gang of thugs to drive the sheep to the valleys deep, through the heather and the furze. But a man of cloth stood up for truth. Tom Furlong was his name, and he led the fight for mountain rights, though his battle seemed in vain. Then the Liberator joined the fray, and for 14 years he tried to settle score and in full restore rights to the Bantry side. On it wore, and funds grew lower, but the spirit burned within. till the word was heard in Caulfield's yard on up from Gallows Hill. It struck the rich man in his purse, and his troops were driven home, with one full day to go away and leave their huts of stone. The people set the hills ablaze for everyone to see, and they gained the right for mountain rights and commons decency. They watched the rich man homeward skulk to his mansion on the hill, without his claim to title, scraping funds to fit the bill. That's it.
And it's fascinating, and thank you for sharing that as well.
You could only imagine the hills burning, couldn't you? And the fires, and they all dancing and jumping. And the
You mentioned earlier in that passage about the witch's den.
The Witch's Cave.
The Witch's Cave, sorry. Are there any other stories of folklore from this area? Or were you told any maybe ghost stories when you were younger, or are there anything like that exist?
Well, St. Moling had a very powerful position down in St. Mullins from about 600s, I suppose, I forget, 500s, 530s, 50s, something like that. And I remember as a young child passing by a standing stone with my mother and father and sister in the car, and my father had taken us out to show us the standing stone and telling us the story of two standing stones side by side of the husband and wife who were caught churning butter on a Sunday by St. Molan, and as a consequence he ended up turned into stone. So that was, I suppose, superstition and myth and pishogues, or whatever it is that you want to call it, that connected the power of a struggle, I suppose, that was going on between Christianity and trying to leave pagan times behind, and trying to remove people from gathering at wells and having their own automation, their own power, their own thought, or being able to continue in the vein that was there before their new oppressors, if you want. Yeah.
And were those two stones from Ballywilliam over to Drummond?
Yeah, on the back road
the
between
back road,
Drummond and Templudigan. So yeah, I mean that's an overhang, I'm sure, from the days when fear had to be inculcated into people, and it was.
I'm curious. Do either of you speak Irish?
Very flimsily.
I was just going to ask: is it an important kind of thing within this area, or even on the music scene? You know.
My favourite phrase is Tá sé imethe I drone firina. I will consider putting it on my gravestone. It says he is gone in the direction of truth. So if anyone knocks on the door at home and I'm not there, and the missus answers and they say, is he in? Tá sé imethe I drone firina. We try to keep the mystery in our lives.
Yeah, it would be lovely to be fluent in Irish.
Yeah,
it really would, and we both have the desire to do that. Now the library in Ross do less, so it is available, and we can go over to the Gaeltacht and hopefully. Yeah. But in the area, it's just through the schools, as far as we know. We don't have an Irish per se thing in the community. Yeah.
Would you say that local culture was important for you both growing up, and do you think it's still an important thing now?
Oh God, yeah, huge.
Well, I didn't know much about culture growing up, to be honest with you. It was just, you're in the here and the now. What's thrust into your face is what you generally accept, I suppose, as a child. When I came back home, I was more able to identify with culture, because I had been part of another culture that was being made up almost before my eyes as time was passing in comparison to thousands of years of civilization. So coming home and seeing the difference, or even being in England, or they have their own culture, but we certainly have ours here that in a lot of ways is uncontaminated and uncorruptible, to a degree. I think it's so old.
And what do you think will be maybe the most important kind of natural heritage or kind of local natural heritage aspects in the Blackstairs Mountains? Would it be, the maintenance of kind of local landscapes, protecting maybe biodiversity? What do you think are kind of the most important things?
Well, do you want to answer that?
You mentioned biodiversity. Any natural area that is crucial, and the Blackstairs is a unique area in itself. The mountainous areas and the heathers and the wildlife, whatever is connected with that, and it is being protected to a degree because you have the walks, and I know Coastal are up there and they're maintaining the woodlands and that, but there's a lot of local people here love walking the mountains or the mountain range, and they all have, and every single Sunday there's some of them going up there and they're doing whatever, walking whichever. And now we have the Columban Way, which goes along the top of the ridge of it, or part of it. It's all, and goes down into Borris, I think. It goes down to County Carlow. So that's all, that will maintain that. That's very important.
I think it's very important that the names of the old roads are recognised and are still in use and are heard in songs, are heard in stories, are heard on TV and programmes. These names should be mentioned. It's important.
Keep them alive. From
Ratgrove, from the Strucon to the Watery Lane to the Dirk, and all the way up to Ratmuir. All these old names are connecting us to the past, and they're connecting us to Irishness and the Irish language as well. And we can learn Irish through the past really as easily, I think,
Yeah, particularly the place names. We got the book Listen to the Land Speak by Manthon Magan, I think it's Magan, his second name. And that is a very interesting book as regards the origin, the place names in particular, but all the old sites of Ireland are so, like Listen to the Land Speak, the title says what it is so important, and for the generations that are to follow us, to be able to link what these names. Our Irish language is very descriptive. It actually tells us what the place is, and when we look into that, it tells so much of that area and what it was originally, and now we can, so that is a way of keeping that alive. I've kind of gone off my track now, but it was just as regards the language and the keep.
Are there any particular sites or locations around the Blackstairs that have particular meaning to you or your family?
Well, as a youngster, I used to love going up on the Blackstairs. And
Cohears Den?
Yeah, it was probably Cohears Den, I suppose, or the fact the old plane went in the Second World War. There was two pilots killed, I think. They were buried up in Ratmuir. And then they were moved up to Kiltiernan, and I think it was in Wicklow. But there was a certain adventure about the whole thing, the plane crashes and well, actually I was talking to one of the locals recently, and his grandfather was the one that brought down the bodies of the two airmen and kept it in his shed, and he's still connected to that story. There's a lot of people who would have brought off little parts, I suppose, as mementos by dint of the fact that it actually happened on their doorsteps, and it was raging at the height of the Second World War, I suppose, then as well.
And haven't you know the story, or have heard the story of something with St. Moling of Templuligan connected to the area above Ballygarrett?
Yeah, well, there was an old church here apparently in Templudigan. They're not too sure where the old church was, but it was. This area here is Ballygalvert, where we are, and the Irish for Ballygalvert is Ballygowl Soggart, which is the townsland of the foreign priests. And in this case, this was a sister parish to a Welsh settlement that was created in Cahors. So their first priory was set up down in Ballygarrett, Cahors area, and actually a place called Donamore was the name of the place. So Donamore was twinned pretty much with Templudigan here, and where we are right here on this perch, the church is not far from here, and you can see from the view out the window here that it would have been an ideal location for a church. And this goes back to about maybe the 600s as well, because this was the pre-runner apparently, the Templudigan, which was Temple Ludigan, or Ludigan's church, and he was purported to be the nephew of St. Patrick. So St. Patrick's nephew is the one that apparently founded the church here, but there's definitely a connection with Glascarrig and the original Welsh order that set up camp here. So I'm not quite sure where it is. Some people say it's down further in the valley, others say that it's up in the graveyard where the old church was, because there's ruins up there as well, but we're not too sure.
And do you think that the natural landscape here in the Blackstairs has changed over time?
Over time? Well, if you consider, I suppose, the last ice age has been over time, but probably there was probably something popping up there already, but over in the recent 10,000 years, I wouldn't say very much really.
Wind farms.
Yeah, wind
would
farms.
Be,
yeah,
and I suppose certain amount of fields would have changed because through cultivation over the decades, you'd have ditches being taken out and reclaiming of land and bogland. But now with the more recent schemes, they're putting ditches back and more trees put in. Yes, now that would have changed. There's an area called Dyfed, which means, is it the black oak? So the Blackstairs was originally, if seen from a distance, particularly from Enniscorthy, they just saw the black, and that area then was called the Dyfed.
It was wiped out because they'd used all the wood for the foreign forces in the 1600s around the lowlands of Holland and so on to go off and fight the wars. So there wasn't a tree left in that area after the English had plundered and pillaged.
So all that timber was taken, like that would have happened all over Ireland. So that would have changed. On the Carlow side, I'm not too sure. I'm sure it would have been equally as woodland, wooded.
And in the recent, hundreds of years, I suppose, old cairns would have been knocked, or old raths would have been levelled, or so that would have changed, I suppose,
Spring wells would have been taken out. There's a character we had here, he's dead 6 years now, known as the Miller, and he's well worth mentioning. His real name was Ned Devericks, but he mentioned many wells they were taken out. We've one on our land, which is lovely. It's still there, and it used to have the famine, the time of the famine times, people came down to it and got water, and we can still get water from it. It's still there as a spring well. So that would have changed. So between trees and ditches and probably roads.
Trees, yeah, definitely.
And spring wells. And
it used to be the home of the Starling, to the point where people from Tipperary to Sligo to Wexford, they recognise starlings. Some of them called them Blackstairs, and an awful lot of them used to find their home on the Blackstairs mountains. But they thought that it was connected with the naming of Blackstairs, maybe Styra, they weren't too sure, but Starry, I think, is a crag or a promontory, so that kind of it's corrupted then with the English of black mixed with promontory or black crag or cliff.
That's very, sorry.
Yeah, so that's people always kind of connect the Starling with the Blackstairs Mountains.
That's really interesting. I didn't twig that before, because every November we still have the mumerations, I think it's called, the starlings. And if you go to Ballywilliam and take the Pasty Road and just go out about a quarter of a mile, or even in Ballywilliam village, and look towards the south, look towards Rathcarogue, you'll see all the, and people come from miles, because you often see cars parked on the road looking at the starlings in the evening. And it's a I often thought it would be another kind of a tourist thing maybe in the area, in the Ballywilliam area. And these starlings are just getting ready for night time, and they're flying all around making all these patterns, and you see people over a gate with the cameras or
Do you know what the Irish word for starling is?
No,
Druid.
it is not. Druid. Right. So that's an interesting kind of connection to the Blackstairs Mountains and the starlings. Yeah, there you go.
And would either of you spend much time walking in the Blackstairs now, presently, or? Yeah,
not every Sunday, but I would go up whenever I can with any one of the dogs. There'd always be a dog with me. Because there's an awful lot of cul-de-sacs. You can take a whole lot of different little lanes, and they'll bring you up to a little area, and then you can walk the foresty tracks. And I know a local lady who, Anne, and she did her walking for the Camino, and she practiced all over the Blackstairs Mountains. And then she did a part of the Camino down in Spain, yeah. So it was a good practice area for that.
And would you have a favourite kind of route to take, or a mountain to kind of climb, or?
I don't know them well enough, but I think the one that for the
Up
Ballybon, which brings you up to the meetings, and then some people walk from the meetings along the ridge to the cairn on the White Mountain, where the cross is. There's two crosses there. There's a Millennium Cross and an older cross, and then there's a cairn, which would be a site of a king, High King.
Brandove, I think. Yeah.
Brandove, is it? Yeah,
Maybe.
Which is on the White Mountain. And that's a beautiful place. Oh, and Cahir's Den, of course, is another nice one, which is up the same lane, Ballybon Lane, but you veer off to where the craggy part of the Blackstairs Mountains is. And last year I went there with my daughter and a French student that she had, and it's roughly around where you were talking about, where the cave could be. Now we didn't have time to have a look for the cave, but that's a beautiful spot, because you can sit on those massive boulders and you can just look over the Carlow side, or you can look over the Wexford side. They're beautiful. Mount Leinster, went up there this year and tried to find the 9 stones, and the view is incredible from that particular side, but we missed the 9 stones. I actually asked somebody the other night, where are the 9 stones? Oh, they're just tucked, if you know where the car park is, up there. Just look to the right, and they're just over there. They're not very big now, but they're just over there. I said, right, okay. So now we know where the 9 stones.
Stonehenge that came behind. Did you ever see what was the name of that movie? Spinal Tap? No? Yeah. Do you remember Stonehenge when it came down? It was about 4 inches tall. Oh, they're over there. Don't trip over the front.
Yeah, so that is a beautiful area too. Coming from Bunclody to the 9 stones, the views are absolutely incredible. And then we drove down from there to Burris, and that was lovely too. Yeah.
The White Mountain. Do you know what the history of the name is?
Schliebon.
But do you know why it's called the White Mountain?
Well, we would have heard Schliebon referred to the White Mountain really, but the White Mountain I presume is because of the snow. I'm not quite sure. But Schlie was an important route. We were just reading there recently where it's in primary control. The primary roads would be Schlies, and secondary roads were Tokers, and the tertiary roads then were Bohers, which were the tracks of the cow. And Schliebon would have been part of the Scollog gap, I suppose, and that was one of the serious ways that allowed people to be able to travel from the Midlands, I suppose, down to the southeast.
And you mentioned earlier on some of the kind of nature that would be found in the Blackstairs. Has that changed over time? I mean, are there animals or insects that you're seeing now that maybe you didn't see before, or vice versa?
Well, the frogons are still there, the bilberries growing, so that's part of
And the bog
what's,
cotton.
what's in continuum. The deers, I wouldn't say are as plentiful as they used to be. There's a few deer pits up there apparently that a few people I know where they are, and they must go back a long, long way. So maybe other than that, wild boar, I don't know, when they went out, you know.
The not the falcon, what is it? Buzzard. They're still come down, and we've lost odd lambs over the years with them. So they are very prominent on the mountains. On this walk that we raised money for the Dyfed last February, the little streams coming down, the loads of frog spawn. So I was delighted to see that, because we used to have frog spawn on our, we don't have any at the moment anymore. So that's really healthy to see that. Wouldn't know an awful lot about the wildlife. I'm sure they're still there. Yeah.
And we briefly mentioned kind of tourism earlier on. How would you view the kind of current state of tourism, say in the broader Blackstairs Mountain areas?
Non-existent, from what I can see. There's a few individual enterprises now beginning to kind of maybe motivate a little bit, but the Blackstairs is not being utilised as a tourist venture really at all. You know, if you're not into walking, there's no reason to go there. If you're not into sharing nature, you know, and maybe if you're trying to depend on the 25 or the 30% who are finding spirituality now, that's one thing, but the other 70% certainly aren't being drawn there.
Yeah, the views. People who go to take, like that time we went to see the Nine Stones, we had 2 students, there was 4 of us in the car, and they were 15, 16-year-olds, 2 Spanish girls, and one of them was intrigued with the view from up there. And on the Nine Stones, we couldn't get up to Mount Leinster because the fog was on. Yeah, it was too wet too. So we went on the Slieve, and there's another Slieve Bon on the other side of the road. So we climbed that, and that went really well. And then, so besides the walking and mountain hill walking, there's young lads, and they have a right time every Sunday. So they would do a bit of quadding. So that's going on up there as well. And cycling. I think that's right, there's the bicycle, what do you call that, hill biking, or you know, when you have a particular type of bike that you can go on that kind of terrain. The tourism thing, well, Burris is definitely, it's part of the Columban way, so that will help tourism.
But in answer to your question, you know, if you're to be drawn to the area, other than its natural feature and beauty and its sacred past, there's not much to draw people there. You know, simple things like, I remember years ago being up in Scotland and being up around the Cairngorm Mountains, which is in the middle of a remote wilderness, but beautiful skiing and lots of stuff going on there. But one small thing, a place called Harry Ramsden's, the world and its dog were going there to go and buy chips, you know. Like, if you had something as simple as a draw, whether it's food related or whether it's activity related, it would have to be something that would bring people there. you know. There's nothing there that brings people there, you know. Unless you want a good bag of chips up in Killan, but you're not going to climb the mountain for it, you know.
No, well, there is a good bag of chips in Killarney. You just brought back the day we were up in the 9 Stones, you wouldn't believe it, but we were just about to leave, and what came along but the music ting-a-ling of an ice cream van. I swear to God, it was a real ice cream van, and he stopped, opened up the side.
He's lost.
No, and the 2 Spanish girls couldn't believe it, and we said, ice cream! And we just went over and we got 4 cones just like that up at the side of Mount Leinster. He knew the day to go, and there, I don't know where he came from, both Cloney or Enniscorthy, but yeah, that made their day.
And what do you think some of the benefits maybe of increased tourism will be to, you know, whether it's areas like Ballywilliam or communities in the broader Blackstairs area?
What would be the benefits?
Yeah, of increased tourism.
Oh, yeah.
Work, you know. I did leave when I was a young fellow. There would be no reason for people to leave if they have work, you know. They're going to stick around. The same as most youngsters got the opportunity, I suppose, up in the noughties, but, you know, once 2008, 2009 struck, that was a different deal. But there was a generation there where people were brought up at home. They were allowed to be able to stay in their country. I wasn't. And it would certainly help in that regard, you know, just having something that the government should be involved in as well, is just creating work opportunities for people in remote areas, you know, and just create something that is going to draw people there and allow jobs to be created. There's no point in driving everything to the Pale. I think that's pretty full now. They've got their share, you know.
And even giving tax breaks maybe to certain things. I noticed in Ballindagan, the community there have an amazing park for anyone to enjoy. But what do they put in and finance? But a table tennis table made from precast concrete, and the net is made from like stainless steel with real holes in it. I thought, what a clever idea. All you have to bring is your 2 bats or your 4 bats. Put your car with your students or your family, and go, and you have a free. That's something that we've noticed. It's hard to find if with my daughter anyway, and the students, to find something that's free or doesn't cost a lot of money. And that is definitely one that a community had brought together for their local area as but the only. And if you had more of those kind of things, then you can have friendly tournaments, and then it's like GAA. And if not everyone is into GAA, and not every child is, or they might get bullied, or there's different reasons why they leave, and you have these other things in place. Well, it's brilliant. Tennis is another one in town, like you did, and basketball. But to have something so simple like that, but in country areas, it's harder. But I thought that was a real simple idea. Yeah.
And what role do you think that upland communities then could play in developing tourism? I mean, that sounds like an example of that, but are there any roles that can be played by, you know, community members or groups to try and increase tourism?
To increase tourism?
Yeah.
Well, you know, there are innovators out there that create villages that can have a particular product, and they completely monopolize it, you know, where you might have a village with 6 bookshops in it, and they're the best bookshops in the country, you know. There's parts of the States and parts of England that I've seen where strong-minded people have actually taken over a village by putting a motif on it and pushing it to get other people involved, to the point that they're actually competing against each other, like the best coffee in town, where a village has maybe 5 baristas who are competing shoulder to shoulder, and they know that, well, if people are heading from Waterford and they're going to Ballywilliam, they're going to get the best coffee that's in the country, you know. Or a cobbler who is kicking off down in Ferrybank in Waterford, and he has the best shoes, and suddenly maybe the government can create an opportunity for another cobbler to go in beside him and just continue to create amazing shoes and let them compete against each other and push their product in small villages or small areas, like the Harry Ramsden's idea in Scotland. You know, people travelling on buses that were coming from the Hebrides to go to Harry Ramsden's to buy chips, and then suddenly we have one kicking off down in Waterford, but they lost the whole gist of the plan. You know, I mean, it's anyway. Yeah, so you know, in the past you had all these different explanations of your craft. If you were someone making hats, you wore green shoes, and that was part of your guild, you know. Or if you were of the Butchers Guild, you had the aprons that were produced of an evening out, and people recognised each other. You know, there's huge opportunity for joining up the dots by using the past, not the stupid future that people are plotting. You know, the ideas are already there. It's just you need the imagination and the power of the right people, not the ones who have been driving communities for generations. They're the same tired old people as far as I'm concerned. It would be great if there was a switch over from parishes where the strong families are gone and sent over and paid maybe to go into another parish, and then they take the conflict and they take the politics out of the situation. You know, there's an awful lot of the networking remains within the families who are strong within the parishes, and it doesn't spread, or it doesn't drip over to the quite mousy people who are in the backgrounds. It will be mousy for the next generation and mousy for the generation after that as well. You know, I mean, there's a lot that could be done, and that sounds like a rant, but we'll leave it at that.
Yeah. Sometimes it takes, I know Tinnahealy, a good few years ago, it was somebody who moved into the area that could see the value of the courthouse in the centre of the village, and there was another part of it, I think, to the side, another building, because the thinking of the time, which could be about 20 years ago now, because I was living in Hollyford at the time, and we used to go to the Tinnahealy Art Centre, and before it became the Art Centre, they were talking about knocking it down, and it was made from cut stone. It was an incredible building, and the one in the middle of the village is the same. And it took someone with vision, who was from outside, like a blow-in, that was able to help them to understand that this was two incredible buildings, and now they have an art centre, and they converted. I don't know what because we left the area. They've done something with the central building in the middle of the village as well. So tying in what you're just saying, Eddie, there, that sometimes it takes, or it helps somebody else from outside to view, and then there can be change. They'll come up with ideas, or just bringing people together with a meeting, and just throw out the ideas. What can we do? There's an area here, I firmly believe there's a Camino walk which is connected to the one in Spain and France, and it comes from St James's Gate in Dublin down the canals to St Mullins, and then it goes across the land down to Ballahack, and from there they would have got the ships going to either France or Spain, because we've got a lot of churches that are called St James, and the little tiny cell in St Mullins is called St James's Cell. It's the medieval church, and that's something I think that we might be able to. It could be a tour as well, but that's all in the same vein as the Columban Way. It's kind of thinking outside the box of how do you draw people to an area that includes every age group, and kind of at the moment, because our daughter is 19, she's the teenage, and then my other daughter is working with teenage young people. What is there for them that is of interest? And And we do know that some of the teenagers in the area if they have their quads and they're in their 20s and they go up the mountain. So the quadding is going on, and the biking. Outside of that then, I think the mountain's too dangerous for hand gliding, although I think they did do it from the White Mountain one time. Do you remember that happened a while ago?
Paragliding.
Yeah, the hand gliding.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because they do that from one of the Sugarloaves, as far as I know, hand gliding. Yeah. Like as you said, maybe something special in the food area that always draws people. We're led by our belly.
Spicy onion rings.
Yeah, the pubs used to draw people, but like they're kind of a dying breed and they're just hanging on by their fingernails. So with social media and internet and screen time, it's harder to get people to be involved in outdoor pursuits. But it's just thinking.
Yeah,
just
it's
have
down
keep,
to the basics: sex, drugs, and rock and roll. I'm afraid.
Do you think?
If each of you could pick one site from the Blackstairs to showcase to, a group of tourists, what might that be?
One aspect, one side of it.
One site or one
site
or one trail or one activity or.
Yeah, well, I think always the illusion is always going to sell better, and that old smuggler's tunnel, that highwayman's tunnel, still hasn't been found. I think his story could be illuminated. He was a black sheep of the Kavanagh family from Burris from the 1500s, and if the song is anything to go by, none of them appeared, but he was actually apprehended and hung in the Kildare Assizes up in the 1500s. So there's a story there to connect him to the mountain. There's a story to connect him to a very strong family, and he's just lost in it all. This character could be introduced to the schools. Really, it could start with the young, and try and see if they can create some kind of an adventure type of situation up in the mountains there, and maybe create a pub. If you have a publican who's interested in sharing his license, maybe a day a week or 2 days a week. I mean, I think it would be amazing to be able to create a forum up there that had music, maybe, or had a particular type of food that you can't get anywhere else. Maybe a particular type of delicacy that's just introduced as part of the mythology of the highwayman, and maybe introduce the people on the other side of the mountain to the idea as well, because they may have further insight into it. And I would be thinking about something like rock art inside there, maybe thinking about stalagmites or stalactites, or just, it's not, it could lead into many different things. I was also thinking of the fact that the airplane that went down, it could be helpful to try and connect with the German embassy, and maybe work on some kind of a commemorative day where the crash that happened up there would link the families who took the bodies of these young men out of an aircraft and left them in their shed and spent overnight. There's lots of connections that could be created there, just as part of the story or the ongoing tales that are associated with it, just by getting the right people involved.
That sounds a great idea. I was just thinking about your highwayman. Do you know, like they have the pub fair in is it Kerry? They just dress up a goat, and you could have something like the highwayman, the best highwayman, or come in your, like Father Ted characters go off to Craggy. Well, the original they go off there and they dress up as parts. So that could be an element. The only two areas that I really know about is the cairn on the White Mountain, and of course that drive from Bunclody along the Columban Way to the Nine Stones is absolutely incredible. I think I didn't realise we had west of Ireland that looked like so much like the west of Ireland in County Wexford, until it went from, and it was coming from that direction. It's slightly different going the other way, but you still get a good view. Now on the Carlow side, on an ordinary survey map that we have of the Blackstairs mountain, I don't know if you've got that map. I picked up. It's the map of all the Blackstairs, and I picked it up in the local shop. It's about €10, and it's the amount of historical sites that are in the Carlow side, Moyshell and Kildavin and Ballymurphy and Burris, all there. It's been an area that's been lived in for a long time, very, very ancient. Whether anything out of that can be drawn out of, but to make it fun, like the Highwayman, for instance, is and your idea about connecting Germany, it's
well, the initiative should be about creating work for the next generation, so they don't have to leave home, and that's whatever is used for that end. I mean, I think that's the most important thing, because every generation skipped, we have a loss of hundreds of thousands of minds to other countries after the best education and the best of a beginning from the past, that's been they've been allowed to be part of.
I might just close with a question to each of you. What does it mean to you to be living and indeed working in this area?
Well, I'm very lucky to be able to be here, really. I could quite easily be in America, settle down, maybe doing different things, but I was glad and lucky to be able to come home and complete the rest of my journey here where I started it. I have friends who are none so lucky, and they've ended up settled in Australia, different parts of America, different parts of England. So I consider myself very blessed to be able to do that, but it's just it's fortuitous more than anything. It wasn't planned, it was just the way it turned out for me, so I'm grateful for that.
Likewise, the question was again,
what does it mean to you to be from and living and working in this area?
Well, I've been here for over 20 years roughly, because I'm originally from Fellard, but I still find the mountain region, because I'm from a seaside coastal village or area, and it has its own unique qualities. And particularly when you want to get a little space, you can get totally lost in something in a mountainous area, with all its nature, its scenery, its views, its energy. It has all of those, and I am very blessed as well to be able to live here. I could equally live at home again by the sea, because I miss that as well. But I again, thoroughly blessed that we can be here, because we work on Eddie's home place, like that goes back several generations where we live, and we have the music. Now it's a little bit thin on the ground at the moment, but we keep plodding on as one does, and we're looking into other things that we can diversify, which is a great term.
Is there anything then that we haven't talked about that you'd like to add to the record before we conclude?
Not really. Delighted that Records have opened up their business, and it's great to see a sense of the cycle, I suppose, and it continuing as a venue, because the family went back a long way with the hurling, and to create a lot of memories, and they're part of the mythology of the area now. So to be still able to be able to share that mythology, I suppose, you know, by going into the pub and seeing where the records lived and enjoy their success is a lovely thing. And then John Kelly, the boy from Callan, he has his inscription on I think one of the beams out in the outhouse, maybe the dairy wall. There was a book there that Billy Record brought out called No Hurling at the Dairy Door, I think it was called. Maybe in that same building you have John Kelly's signature there as well, so it goes back a long, long way. And yeah, there was, you know, there's lots of stories really related to 1798, which some of them were covered in the reports that the children put in 1931 on the Dukas thing on the website. And people that came back from the Batman side in New Ross wearing other people's boots, you know, that ended up in that area. There's a lot to be told, but yeah, it's an interesting place.
Yeah, the only thing that springs to mind as Eddie was chatting there was bowling is another thing that happens in the area, which it's done in local halls, and also I was thinking about the puck fodder. We were watching something about Ring in County Waterford, the Gaeltacht area, and they do the puck fodder now every summer, and that was an old tradition seemingly back then, and I have a suspicion they might have done it here too in the past. I think they did bowls, did they, along the road?
Road bowling, yeah.
Road bowling, yeah, that would have been done in the past, because I know it was done in the Feathered area. They did it around Grange Road and in that, yeah, where Grange Strand is. So yeah, it's just that's it.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much, Hazel and Eddie, and I'll just stop the recording now.